Hi, folks, and welcome back. This week to a really, really interesting interviewee, Matt Tenney. And Matt, I was going to tell you originally, works to develop highly effective leaders who achieve extraordinary long-term business outcomes and at the same time live more fulfilling lives. He is a social entrepreneur. And for the purpose of our conversation today, perhaps most interestingly, he is the author of two books. One of them is The Mindfulness Edge, How to Rewire Your Brain for Leadership and Personal Excellence Without Adding to Your Schedule, and Serve to Be Great, Leadership Lessons from a Prison, a Monastery, and a Boardroom. But so welcome, Matt. I said that your things have just changed a little bit. Welcome to the program, first off.
Thank you, Derek. Thanks for having me.
And you know what I didn't say to you folks as well, and Matt probably won't thank me for saying this, but Matt, when you meet Matt in person, he's probably one of the most grounded people you'll ever meet. Honestly, and I'm probably embarrassing, you just get this sense of calm and peace off the man that he's kind of right there with you. So it's a real pleasure to be back in the room with you, metaphorically at least, Matt. But just before we came on, Matt was telling me about where he is spending most of his time now on the development of the Genos Group, and that's a really different sort of corporation concept. Matt, do you want to tell folks about it? Because I think the people who are on this program, with the challenges that they have, are going to love what you have to say about the Genos Group.
Oh, sure. Yeah, the main inspiration for me, what really gets me up in the morning in terms of building this company is has very little, if anything, to do actually with revenue. And we kind of view revenue as something that's necessary to fuel our culture. And we're just getting off the ground. So, you know, we're very early on in building this culture. But the vision is quite simple. You know, I think it's very clear that for many, many people, perhaps the majority of people in our world, going to work is making them sick. You know, our workplaces tend to be toxic. They're asked to do too much in too little time. Anxiety is the norm. Being in stressful situations that contribute to that anxiety is the norm. So our vision is building a company that, through its workplace culture, actually contributes to world peace. And how we start doing that is with a very simple shift in our focus, which is, instead of focusing on numbers on a spreadsheet, we're focusing on not just maintaining the well-being of the people who come to work, but actually enhancing it. So if there are three options of going to work, one is coming to work and it's toxic and it's not good for you. The other one is you come to work and it's a neutral effect. I think there are very few places where you can go to work and your well-being is actually enhanced. You're not just growing professionally, but your well-being is literally enhanced, and you're growing as a human being, developing qualities like kindness and compassion and empathy, patience, sustainable happiness. And that's the focus. We're building a place where people can come to work and grow, not just professionally, but as human beings, and have their well-being enhanced, where people can thrive. And my work has been, over the last 5 or 6 years, has been encouraging business leaders to do things along these lines. And I use other companies' case studies that are showing that this is actually very, very good for business. But so part of the thrill for me is we want to build our own case study, to show that you can actually focus just on loving your team members. And of course, as we mentioned before we went live here, I mean, you have to have obviously a good value proposition. Your business,
absolutely, you have to make money.
The business basics have to be there. But assuming that the fundamentals of business are there, I am extremely confident that if we as business leaders focus on loving our people as a higher priority than quarterly profits, the numbers follow. And the Serve to Be Great goes into case study after case study of that. But with the Genos Group, we hope to make an even stronger case study where work is a place where even, I hesitate to use the word spiritual development. I actually just prefer the word human development. But those two are the same thing. They're synonymous. Where instead of spiritual development being relegated to something you do on the weekends, why shouldn't that happen at work? Work is where people spend 40 to 60 hours a week, some people 80 or 100. Why shouldn't that be a place where you're developing these highest qualities of being human, like kindness and compassion and patience sustainable
it's a fascinating vision. And during the program on the webinar platform, we often ask for a show of hands, a little electronic show of hands on it. And I can imagine now if I said, give me a show of hands, who'd like to work in the Genos group? I think we'd see them zooming up there. But you're not yet open to employing folk yet. But you mentioned that in the book, and
we're open to employing folks for sure.
Great. You give a lot of guidelines that will help people to start, if they have the authority, to start creating that sort of environment, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
We are actually growing and hiring. So we're always welcome. There's very few people that even heard of the company, but as soon as people hear about the culture, it already happens. We have people that just overhear it in a conversation, and next thing you know, we get a resume from somebody saying we would like to work there. So that's just one testament, which I did write about in Serve to Be Great, is one of the, if not the only sustainable competitive advantage in business today, is having a workplace culture that is innovative and that treats customers very well, right? Yeah. So your workplace culture is literally, it's a one-to-one correlation to your cash flow and to your long-term profitability. And the good thing about it is, well, it's good and bad. The bad thing is it's incredibly hard to have a workplace culture that not only to create one like that, but then to sustain it. It can be done. But the good news about that is if you genuinely care about these things, if you genuinely care about taking care of others, about serving others, no one else can copy you. Anyone can copy your product in 6 weeks, probably today. Yeah. Anyone can copy your value proposition in a week. Anyone can copy your marketing strategy in a week. Basically, anything that you do as a business could be copied within weeks in today's world. It would take 5 years minimum for someone to transform an unhealthy culture into one that is where people are thriving. That's just a hotbed of innovation and of customer service.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating, and I'm going to give details of the book underneath the interview here. In fact, it's scrolling across the screen there below us as we speak. So make sure, if that's something that appeals to you folks and you're hearing this and you're thinking, God, I'd like a little piece of that. Besides the fact that you heard it here first, you can apply to Matt right now. Grab Serve to Be Great and have a look at what inspiration it gives you. The main reason I invited Matt on today was because of his book, The Mindfulness Edge. And you've heard me week after week say that I am a great fan of anybody's writing who gives you a perspective on mindfulness, on how practically you can take it and integrate it into your life. And that's something that you did really, really well in The Mindfulness Edge, Matt. But let me ask the question I always ask at the beginning of people. How did you get into this work?
Oh, by being a tremendous failure, actually. So probably a combination of being a failure, being stupid, doing something dishonest, and then some really good luck. Okay. So I'll give you the quick version here. So sure. Almost 20 years ago now, when I was a much younger man, I did something very stupid, and I actually did a few things that were blatantly dishonest. Right. And I partially attempted a fraud against the United States government. I didn't actually complete it, but I had taken enough steps that made me guilty of an attempt of a fraud. Right. And as a result, I ended up spending 5.5 years confined to prison. Wow. And so that's the being stupid and dishonest part. And then the very lucky part for me, this has nothing to do with any virtue of mine or any aspect of me that has anything good about it. This is just pure luck. I started learning about mindfulness training about a year into my time in confinement. And very fortunately for me, the way that it was presented, I think the very first book that I read was a book called Peace is Every Step by Thich Nhat Hanh. Okay. And it was extremely practical about, hey, if you're just brushing your teeth, or if you're just washing your hands and you're not comparing that moment to a thought of the past or the future, it's actually okay. Yeah. And believe it or not, that's true even if you're in one of the worst places on earth, which I was. I was in a pretty cold, dingy military prison, actually. And as I started practicing, after about 6 months, as you probably have guessed from what you've heard of me so far, I'm a bit type A. And when something makes sense to me, I just do it. And it's usually 100% or nothing. And so I just did it 100%. And after about 6 months, I was making the effort to just let go of our constant habit of grabbing onto our thinking and just being open to, well, what's actually happening now. And I was doing that nearly almost every waking moment of the day. And it was at that point, I mean, just probably about 6 months into practicing, where I realized, oh my goodness, I'm actually happier in what many people would call hell on earth than I'd ever been in my life. And I was 22 at the time, maybe 23. So I had a few years under my belt, and I was happier there than I'd ever been. So that really motivated me to go as deep as I could with the practice. And I ended up essentially ordaining as a novice monk while I was confined, as did another inmate. And was living and training exactly as monks live and train, practicing sitting and walking, very formal practices of mindfulness for hours and hours every day. And then again, still making the effort to be mindful during activity. And the two big shifts that came out of that was not just, one was obviously this tremendous gift of learning that we can literally be happy with nothing. We don't need any conditions to be met to be happy. Happiness is actually always present. It's always available, which we'll probably touch on a little bit later. But the other was just, the monastic life is one where you give up all of your short-term selfish desires and you really focus on bettering yourself so that you can be of help to others. That just totally transformed my experience of being confined. And so at that point, it was the most meaningful experience of my life. Every day I had people asking me, how are you happy in this place? Are they giving you drugs? I mean, what's going on? Because, in normal daily life, if you see somebody laughing like Deiric, you just think, oh, well, he heard a funny joke or he had
life is good.
Yeah, but if you see somebody in a prison every single day who's happy, it starts to click. Okay, there's something different. And it's either chemically induced or I want whatever he's doing. So it's just, every day there was an opportunity to help somebody. And I also realized that even helping people there, that was having a ripple effect to helping people outside of the prison. Like if I helped a guard go home and be happier, he or she was more likely to treat, his or her spouse better, or his or her girlfriend, or their kids.
I think, and you said several things there I really want to latch onto, but let me start with the last one first, because people have been asking on the program, they've been saying, yeah, but I'm in a workplace that's really, really toxic. And I can work on myself all day long, but all of those guys over there, they got a problem. I'm not going to change them. And what you're saying is, you are.
For sure.
Yeah.
Just who you are has an effect. I mean, this is measurable. If you've done any research into to emotional intelligence, emotions are highly contagious, even without saying a word. You affect others just by who you are. Regardless of how toxic the environment is around you.
And interesting, the kind of mantra, and I don't mean the formal sense, that we repeat all the time in the program, is that the way you show up determines the way people feel determines whether they engage with you, and so on and so forth. And that's exactly what you're saying. If you show up as a more mindful individual, as a happier individual as a result, well, then you automatically create the conditions for a more happy environment.
Without a doubt, it's the single most important thing you can do, in my opinion.
Sorry, go ahead. I beg your pardon.
Just to close the loop on that into how did we get into the work here? I'll try to keep this brief. But so the two big takeaways were just realizing you can be happy with nothing, and realizing that a life worth waking up for in the morning is one where you're being helpful to others.
Right.
And so I actually almost ordained as a monk. When I left prison, I went and lived in a monastery and was almost ordained for the rest of my life. But then I realized that I think I could have a better ability to help others outside of the monastery. Ended up co-founding and leading a couple small nonprofit organizations. And through that, I was just seeing how engagement is improved by taking care of team members. Started getting very interested in how that could be applied in the for-profit world and how mindfulness could be of help. And so I just started sharing it, and little by little, things just fell into place. I started working with more and more organizations, and that led to writing a book. The first book, Serve to Be Great, and doing probably about 4, I guess it's been almost 5 full years now of officially kind of full-time doing that, the training and the speaking work. So that's how we got to doing that in helping organizations to do that with leadership development, and specifically focusing on developing these qualities that mindfulness helps us to develop.
And I mean, I steal liberally from everybody's work, and I'll always try to credit them. But I had stolen from you, and it was only when I reread the book recently, and I went back in there, I realized, oh, that's where I got that. And one of the things that the folks on this program are familiar with is I tell them, start with mindfulness to brushing your teeth, because why not attach your mental hygiene to your dental hygiene?
Oh, I love it. Yeah, that's more catchy than what I did.
and that's exactly what you say in the book. And you say, once you got the teeth down, we'll then start moving on to other routines and so on and so forth. But something you said there about the Thich Nhat, I can never say his name right, Thich Nhat Hanh's book. You said around that in his book, he said, and I thought it was really something important to share with folks there. He said, if you're just paying attention to brushing your teeth, and stop me if I'm paraphrasing wrong, and not comparing yourself, or not looking at the past or the future, and not comparing yourself to other standards around you, you're already mindful. I know I'm badly paraphrasing. You know what I'm talking about, right?
No, I think that's a pretty good paraphrase. Yeah, I think there's this tendency, especially in the West, to make things way more complicated than they actually are, because there are hundreds, if not thousands, well, I'm sure there are thousands of books written about mindfulness. So you must think, wow, this must be this really complicated subject. And it's actually not. It's, literally the moment that you realize that you were distracted, that's it. You've reached the goal. There's nothing else to do. The moment that you realize that you were caught in thought, you just became mindfully self-aware. That's all there is to do. Now, here's where it does get tricky, is sustaining that. Because the habit that we have of identifying with and living as though we are the thinking in our head is so strong that for most of us, we just get these little brief glimpses of, okay, I'm aware of my thinking, it's not affecting me. That just happens spontaneously and quite randomly, and it doesn't last very long. So I think that's where the practice comes in, is learning how to sustain that so that you can, it's kind of like learning how to sustain flow state, so that you can be in essentially what Csikszentmihalyi refers to as the state of flow.
Sure.
And it's the ironic part is that it's actually not much of an effort. It's more of just letting go of a bad habit, and then once it's dropped, just recognize that you've dropped the bad habit, and there's nothing else to do, except some of the things that we often talk about in mindfulness training is just noticing sensations as you're doing things. And the reason we say that is because it kind of helps string these moments of being aware, being awake. It helps string those moments together so that the experience is a little bit more impactful. And so that habit starts to become something that's just naturally occurring more often. But quite counterintuitively, it's almost as though the harder we try, the less productive we're going to be in terms of being more mindful.
One of the things
real effort is just the real effort, the real trying is recognizing how insidious this habit is and not giving up and just always coming back to, okay, there it was. I was totally in my thinking again, and it's okay. And now what? Now what is this moment like? And it's just great. When thinking isn't there messing things up, the moment's pretty okay. And that's something that became really, really obvious. It can become obvious at any point, but maybe just for those of you in watching this video right now, we'll just make it perfectly practical. If you're just sitting here right now, you're listening to Deiric and I have a conversation, and hopefully it's something that's of value to you, and you're not caught in some thought about what you did yesterday or what you're going to do tomorrow, if you're not in extreme pain or starving, what's wrong with this moment right now? Not a thing. But I guarantee you, if you knew that 15 minutes from now, you were going to have your favorite meal of steak and a glass of wine or whatever it is, this moment would start to become increasingly painful, right? If you really wanted that steak and wine, you'd be like, when is this thing over? The closer you get, the more painful it would be. So it's not to say that we should not have goals or not plan for the future or learn from the past. All that we're saying is to have the choice to recognize, am I really caught in this? Or is this just a thought that's arising and passing away, which they're going to naturally do forever, all the time? That's just, the brain thinks, it's what it does. Yeah. So if a thought comes up, can it just arise and pass away, but still awareness is just always present with what's actually coming in right now, not fixated on steak and wine 15 minutes from now, which then makes this experience very unpleasant, right?
Yeah.
So that maybe just a very simple example right now of how that operates.
And I think what you're doing a great job, and you do a great job in the book. At one stage, Matt says in the book, he said, and it exemplifies the fact that we're not trying to achieve some exalted, esoteric state, that there's no state to be achieved, that we are all, and again, I'm paraphrasing, accidentally mindful from time to time. We become mindful, we get into the moment. It's just that it's not persistent. And sometimes when we start practicing this, we're looking for something more. We become mindful, we arrive and we say, okay, now what do I do next? So that was step one. Step two. Now, how do I go to that next level? It's probably a very westernized thing. But you're saying just to notice that, hey, I'm here. I'm actually paying attention to this. Now you've made it. And in this moment, you've made it. And now it's about the next moment that as it comes along, and you string those together, become more persistent.
Right.
But the thoughts are what screw at that, right? The continual rise of thoughts in your head is really what knocks you off that center kilter, right?
Close. In my opinion, it's not so much the thoughts themselves. Yeah. It's our habitual tendency of identifying with them.
Yeah.
We operate as though we are our thinking. So to take one step back, we'll come back to this, but this idea of the next level, there really isn't one. Now there are, if you do very formal practice, or even if you just practice intensively in daily life, there are some experiences that are incredible. But that's not the goal. You hear of these enlightenment experiences or awakening experiences. These are actually, they can be very powerful, and they can make you think that, like, oh, that's what I should be getting.
Right.
That's just actually something else that's totally dependent on conditions. If you have a very deep insight into things are always changing, and you add the condition of there's lots of mental energy, or you add the condition of your mind is very collected because you've been on a retreat for 3 days, you can have a very profound experience, where there's just a burst of emotion and you feel like, wow, that was it. That must have just had an awakening.
I've arrived.
Yes. But all that is just, it's just another experience. And where the real value is recognizing that the moment that you wake up, that's really the goal.
Yeah.
And if you pay attention, you realize how hard it is to just be that, to just be knowing what's happening without all this added attachment to thinking that happens in our head. And so the deeper levels that people are looking for, they actually happen quite automatically. If you just keep coming back to recognizing when you're distracted and when you're not, noticing what it's like to be not, and just being, like, once you recognize that you're not distracted, just being, noticing what you're noticing, essentially. It's called meta awareness. Just being aware of the fact that things are happening. There are sounds happening. There are sensations happening. There may be thoughts coming and going. It doesn't matter. They're just things happening. What will naturally happen is you start to have a little bit stronger awareness without even necessarily trying, of what's happening internally. And when you start to see thinking more objectively, naturally, you start to have the insight that we were going to touch on here, which is we're not our thinking. Intellectually, we know this, right? Intellectually, we know that when this brain dies and becomes dirt, thinking is gone. There may be some other type of cognition that happens when the body dies, but thinking as we know it is gone, because that is created by the brain. It happens every night when you go to sleep. You're not thinking for the vast majority of your sleep when you're not doing it, right?
Sure.
So we already know that this happens. But we don't live that way, do we?
No.
We walk around as though that voice in our heads that's saying, should I eat that slice of pizza, or should I go to the gym? Or whatever the voice is saying. Should I should I confront that employee about that inappropriate behavior, or should I just, let it slide this time? Whatever that inner voice is, we believe that that's me in there talking. And even though intellectually we know better. So the kind of the fruit of the practice, without even having to really try. And there are some times where you can direct awareness inwardly, intentionally a little bit, but it's not something you need to do, forever. It's just a skillful means of temporarily pointing attention inward, looking back at your own thoughts. And what you realize is something that most people in their lives will never see, at least not directly experience. And that's this. If you're sitting, and let's just say hypothetically, most people can't even conceive of this unless they've been practicing for some time or they get out in nature a lot.
Yeah.
But let's just imagine that you're sitting still and your mind is completely empty of thought. Okay? You're obviously there, right? There may be sounds, there may be the sensation of sitting. Experience is happening. You exist, however we're defining you in this moment. But there's no thinking. And then a thought comes up about, should I go to the pizza or should I go to the gym?
Yeah.
Or should I eat pizza or should I go to the gym? You can observe that thought, or if it's that inner voice, you can hear the voice, and then that goes away and it's quiet again. What does that tell you? You are not that thinking. You were there listening to silence or observing a completely empty mind. You were there when that thought just started bubbling up until it consumed your consciousness and then fizzled away. And you were there when it was gone. So now, again, intellectually we know this, but it's with the practice that this starts to become an experience that actually changes behavior. It starts to change that habit of always just, every time a thought comes up, we grab onto it, we become it, and then and sometimes there's 4 conversations going on in our head, right? There's the me that wants to go to the gym, fighting with the me that wants the pizza, fighting with the me that is upset that I'm even arguing over these things. There's a lot going on in there, right? And we can all, I'm sure, relate to this. The point is, it doesn't matter how much of that is going on. If you can just see it objectively, if you see it as just something else that arises and passes away in experience, it doesn't control. And that is the biggest gift, I think, that mindfulness brings is, from a happiness standpoint, it's obvious, right?
Sure.
If you could imagine the most annoying experience in the world right now, like let's just say, pick your least favorite music, whoever's listening, just think of the least favorite genre of music you could imagine. And let's say that it's blasting full volume in the room that you're in. How long could you sustain that? Maybe 30 seconds before you want to kick the speaker in, right? But now let's say if I took that speaker and I put it 3 miles away, now what effect does it have on your emotional well-being? Zero. So in the same vein, imagine that we're so identified with our thinking that it's us, right? If it's good, we feel good. If it's bad, we feel bad. If it's depressed, we feel depressed. The thinking is us. Well, what happens if that thinking, if we have an objective awareness of it, it's almost as though we can observe it as though we're watching a television screen. With time, and this is just an analogy, it's not as though your thinking actually gets further away from you, but what you will notice is that there's a sense of more spaciousness around it, and it's something that your thinking just comes and goes, arises and passes away. If it's something skillful, you can choose to act on it. If it's not, it just arises and passes away, and there's no problem, right? There are no problems. So from a happiness standpoint, it's really clear, but I think from an effectiveness standpoint, it's also incredibly important, right? Because to the degree to which we're acting out of old conditioned thought patterns and habits, innovation is never going to come from there, right? If our conditioning is not good and we're not a very kind person or we don't listen well, then all the emotional intelligence traits that we'd like to develop, they're not going to happen.
Sure.
So the only way that those things happen is when we become free from the constraint of our thinking. And that actually happens, again, just to come back to the core point here, that happens immediately when you just wake up from the fact that you're distracted and you are aware that you're sitting here and there may be thinking, there may be not. It's instant. The trick is learning to break the habit of always going back and grabbing onto thinking and talking to ourselves and being that, and just learning to just be much more simple, which is just hey, what's happening now?
Sure. And I wrote down a quotation from the book, which I thought was really, you nailed exactly what you're talking about. Just said, you kind of position it as becoming aware of our thinking, instead of becoming our thinking. And that's exactly what we habituate to. We allow ourselves to become whatever we're thinking, and to listen to those voices. And as you say, assume that this is us talking, and therefore it deserves attention.
Right. And just a clear point, to clarify something, thanks for bringing that up, Deiric, because I noticed that this happens a lot where people get slightly confused what I'm saying here, or I'm sure you've mentioned something like this before. Well, and that is that people think we're trying to push thoughts away. Like the thoughts are the problem. We're trying to push them away, and we're trying to create that space. We don't have to create the space. The space is already there. It's a bad habit that's actually quite an illusion that creates the sense that we are thinking. All we have to do is just recognize what's happening. If you start recognizing what's happening, it could be as simple as this. So I'll give you a very practical exercise right now. So if we're just sitting here, maybe you're standing in your office, I'd like you to just gently be aware, just generally be aware of your body sitting there for just a second. Nothing special, right? So that's it. You're awake, you're mindful. And I'd like you to just ask the question silently in your mind. Is there any thinking right now? The second you ask that question, you are aware of your mind with an objectification of thinking as you're ever going to be, right? That's it. It's just a matter of being able to sustain that. And, again, if you're on retreat or something, it might become more profound, where it really does feel like thoughts are 2 miles away. But the point is, as long as it's objective, as long as you're objectively aware of what's passing through the mind, that's it. You're free from the constraints of your thinking, And I love that's a very simple exercise to practice. It's just, is there thinking right now? And it doesn't matter whether the answer is yes or no. Just notice. Yeah. What you'll probably notice, though, is that usually when you first ask that question, there's nothing. Usually when you first ask that question, is there any thinking happening right now? As the now fades, you'll notice, even if it's just an instant, there's nothing there. Yeah. Right? And then immediately it's like the mind comes in and says, oh, I want more of that. That felt nice. How do I sustain that? How do you sustain it? Simply say, oh, I hear the voice talking that wants to sustain it. Just notice it. And just keep coming back to, is there thinking now or is there not? Are there sensations coming in? Are there not? Just whatever's happening is fine, right? Yeah. And just noticing that it's there. And just continually stringing together those incidents when you notice, and you snap back just into that moment of noticing. Right. And I think what you'll find, this is going to go, and believe me, as I mentioned earlier, I am probably the most type A person on this conversation or this group of people listening, if not among them. And what you're going to find, which is totally counterculture, especially if you're type A like me, is that how you string those moments together is by literally doing nothing. Yeah. So the moment that you wake up and you say, is there any thinking in the mind right now? That's it. And you'll notice things are just happening. Just the awareness that things are happening is it. And if you try to do something else, you're actually moving away from the goal. So now what's going to happen is, again, you might do this for 3 seconds, and then you're going to be thinking or wanting to try something, and that's fine. And then you just say, well, there it is. I'm distracted again. Is there any thinking now? Now, early on, for those, I know we have a broad mix here of people who are listening. If you're very early on, or even if you've been practicing for years, but you just have an incredibly active mind, people often talk about using the awareness of the body or the awareness of the body breathing as a foundation. And that can be a very, very skillful tool. Sure. So once you're awake, to string together these moments just by being aware of the fact that the body's sitting there, noticing that it's breathing. But where it can become problematic is when there's just too much effort, when it's just, I want to keep it, and I'm really trying to focus on the breath, and that can be problematic. Yeah. But if you're just noticing, like, oh yeah, I'm aware that there is this breathing thing happening. That's just a natural, simple way of recognizing that things are happening and allowing those moments to be strung together. And here's an interesting experiment that you could try also is just try not paying attention to anything for a moment. And try to intentionally not notice anything that's happening in your senses. And I can almost guarantee you it's impossible.
Yeah.
As soon as you try to not pay attention to anything, you're going to notice that there's sounds or there's breath or whatever. That's it.
Yeah.
Like,
and you know,
that's the perfect mindful, and I hesitate to use the word state, but that's mindfulness at its core, is just really that meta awareness of noticing, just you're aware that things are happening, things are arising in experience without you having to try to do anything. You're aware that there is breathing happening. Yeah. So that's the one key thing that I really wanted to bring up here as we've talked, is just that this is more of a letting go of a bad habit than it is trying to get something or attain something or add something new to ourselves. It's literally as though, like, what do you have to do to stop smoking other than stop smoking? The moment you've put the cigarette out and you don't put another one in your mouth, you have effectively ended your smoking habit.
Yeah.
Right? Mindfulness is essentially like that. The moment that you are aware that you are thinking or that you were distracted, or that's it. You don't have to go and add something else to that. And
you've arrived.
You have arrived. And the only problem with that is that for many people, they say, well, so what? It doesn't,
yeah.
It doesn't seem
I'm not
very
feeling
special.
it, man.
Right. It doesn't seem very special, right? And that's because it's very ordinary. When it becomes special, and this is, I hesitate to even bring this up because this can lead to, again, the trying to get something. But when that being awake is strung, those moments just happen for some period of time, you will know very deeply how special it is. It will become incredibly clear that this moment is perfect just the way that it is. That you are perfect just the way that you are in this moment. This, what we call existence, is absolutely perfect. Yeah. The other time that it can become incredibly powerful is if you're in the midst of intense suffering and you can remember to just simply recognize, okay, there is angst, there is stress, there is fear, whatever's there, and actually just be with it and look right back at it. And if you can do that, even just to sustain it for a few seconds, that will make it incredibly obvious how you can literally end suffering that you thought was going to persist for days instantly. Just the moment that you look right back at it. And the identification, as soon as the identification with thinking drops, so does suffering, because that's what's causing it.
And you know what, Matt, we couldn't have scripted that better. We really couldn't have scripted it better, because this interview is going out directly after the module where we're looking specifically at that dropping in and dealing with difficult emotions and being with them. So it's absolutely we couldn't have rehearsed to get that right. You know, hey, this is slightly and aware of the time and that I'm keeping you here a long time. Let me ask you a slightly unfair question, and I love to ask it of people that write books, because I've written a book or two myself, and I know there's always something in there. It's a little bit like asking somebody who's your favorite child. There's always something in the book of which you're really, really proud. If you were to pick the one piece of advice or guidance or whatever from the Mindfulness Edge that you would say to people, this is what I'm most proud of, what is that?
That's pretty tough.
Yeah, it's unfair also.
Well, could I maybe rephrase it and just say what I think might be most helpful? Yeah. Is that, again, there are probably thousands, literally, maybe even tens of thousands at this point, of books written on mindfulness or related topics. And there are some that address this, but I think maybe what's most helpful is just this realization that this is not something that we have to add to our schedule, right? This is something, the practice, we can make actually significant progress in the practice. And I'm speaking from personal experience. I don't know of too much research in the neuroscience. Most of the neuroscience is based on people doing some sitting practice.
Sure.
Maybe a little bit of walking. There might be a few studies that incorporate that. But I know from my personal experience and the personal experience of countless thousands of others of people throughout history of practice, is that just, for me, like the first year, I did almost no sitting still practice. It was all just, I'm brushing the teeth now. Now I'm washing my hands. Now I'm just making the bed. Now I'm just putting my shoes on. And here's an ironic thing that I know you'll get right away as a longtime practitioner. But what you will notice, if you haven't already as a practitioner, is probably the first time you ever practiced mindfulness, you already had what you were looking for. And people who have practiced a long time, they eventually come back and they realize, the first week or first day even that I started practicing was all I ever needed. And went on this journey for 10 years to get more and do more and achieve more. And I already had it the first day, and that I think is what could be the most helpful portion, is just this extremely accessible approach that you don't need to go and add 30 minutes of sitting still to your day every day. You will probably find that you can get at least 10 or 15 minutes just in your normal day of sitting at a red light, or commuting into work on a train, or sitting and waiting for a meeting to start. There are times when you can have the advantages. There are many advantages to sitting still. It's a little bit easier for that kind of inward awareness to light up. But you can also make, that's probably not the most precise language to say make progress, but you can also realize wonderful benefit from just starting off with one simple activity that you already do every week, like brushing your teeth. Then after that's almost a habit, and you're going to stick with it, add something else. Sure. The next week after that, add something else. 6 weeks later, you've got 6 little anchors throughout your day that you're going to do anyhow. Why not do them in a way that brings joy, adds a little bit of extra joy to your life, and helps you develop emotional intelligence and helps you to be more effective in the workplace at the same time? That's what I think is perhaps most helpful, is that
I think it's
we can transform.
Perfect advice. Yeah, perfect advice for the audience that's on here, because and it is a topic that comes up all the time. How do I integrate this? I think it's absolutely a perfect place to end it. So you heard Matt. You don't have to sit on a cushion. You don't have to be taking time out of your day. You can make your day your practice. So Matt, thank you very, very much. And I know as the details of the book scroll below here, that you're going to get an awful lot of people hitting onto Amazon to pick it up, because I know that they'll have tuned into the very sensible wisdom that you've shared here today. So thank you for the time. I really, really do appreciate it. And hopefully we see you back on another program at some stage in the future.
It's my pleasure, Derek. Thanks again for having me.
Take care. Have a good one. Bye-bye.